We're now recording. Here we go. So today we are going to talk about different styles of leadership and specifically how we can overcome some of the what we would call stereotypes of leadership. And honestly, I think, it's actually finally nice to be here. Although we're not physically in person, Megumi, it's actually finally wonderful to be here talking with you in person because, we first connected a few years back when we started talking about your story as part of our storytelling with Team Women Australia and to celebrate women in leadership. And serendipitously, I think it is a perfect time that you and I have come together because we are both on a pathway of challenging the stereotyped view of leadership and what we think leadership does look like or should indeed look like. So I am just really going to get in and we're going to talk about your journey and your passion for quietly powerful leadership and why that started for you. But really, thanks for joining me today.
Thank you, Kylie. Thanks. It's really great to finally meet you, as you said.
And you've just, it might correct me if I'm wrong, but was it that you've just also published a book this year?
It was published late last year. I just got the award recently, which was the Australian Career Book of the Year for 2020.
Fantastic. And do you think the timing's serendipitous?
Oh, yeah, I suppose.
Well, let's get into it. So, quietly powerful. I think there's going to be a great conversation because just a bit about you. You've got a background. You're a consultant. You've worked in the leadership development space for a very long time and in culture. And there was a positioning for you that became quite important to talk about based on your own personal experience and the need for us to start challenging our perspectives about what we think a good leader looks like and to give a voice to people who are potentially a lot quieter. And I know that you do talk briefly about how quiet doesn't necessarily mean that you're an introvert. And I, for one, agree with you, right? Because ironically, I'm the opposite. So I'm probably considered more the outward going introvert. So I'm an introvert, but speaking, but I'm certainly not the quiet introvert. But I'm a massive advocate of your work, and for the purposes that I think we do need to start giving people who are perhaps quieter an opportunity to have more a voice. So let's just talk about, I suppose, your purpose and how you got started with Quietly Powerful.
So I suppose the purpose, as you said, is really challenging that stereotype. I still think that even though there's been lots written about, we need leaders with empathy and that listening and all of these things, servant leadership and things like that, I still think possibly unconsciously we still hold on to this almost military style heroic kind of leadership and that masculine alpha male kind of leadership. And I think it's still just that we just hold on to that. And so when we see somebody who perhaps seems a little bit quieter or a little reserved, or maybe they speak quite quietly, we don't see them as leader-like. But what I'm trying to say and challenge is to go, well, actually, some of those leaders are some of the best. And interestingly, when I say those things on social media, for example, I often get messages from people saying, yes, I know this leader was the best and this was the quieter person. So that's my purpose. And I suppose the reason why I got started was, as you said, it was a personal reason and a professional reason. So the personal reason is I've always been a quieter person. I'm also an introvert, but it's not just about introversion, as I said. I have my background is Japanese, and I've always been, even amongst Japanese people, quieter. But you can imagine Japanese people are generally, on the whole, quieter anyway. And so I remember when I was younger, my mum used to talk on my behalf because I never said anything. And as a little kid, it was fine because it was easy. I'd just shut up and mum would just chat, and it's like, well, that's easy. And so I just grew up like that. And then also I moved around a lot as a child. And so not only was I a quieter kid, I was often on the outer. So I moved from Japan to Australia to, where did I go first? I was actually born in Melbourne, but I lived in Sydney as well, then went to public school in Sydney, back to Japan, went to Canada as an exchange student, and then to back to Japan and then to Adelaide. And so I've been in lots of places where I've been on the outer, and that also causes people to go quiet too, as you can imagine. Yeah, because you don't feel like you're in the in-group.
Yes.
And then on top of that, I suppose at times, different times, you find yourself in a group where you're not only a bit different, but perhaps there's some kind of hierarchy. If you go into the workplace and you feel like you don't have anything to add, or you don't feel worthy enough to say things. So there's another reason why you can go quiet. So it is really not just about introversion, is why I'm saying it. So I suppose personally, I had my own challenges. And my very first job was in management consulting. And as you can imagine, management consulting, you're a young 20-something-year-old going into clients, talking to senior leaders, and you're supposed to look confident and you're supposed to look like you know something.
Oh my God.
Oh my God, it was exhausting.
Oh God, I mean, the fact that you even say, oh my God, your first job was management consulting. I couldn't think of anything worse than being somebody who's so quiet and like, oh my God, that would just be petrifying.
I know, it was exhausting. But I
Yeah.
suppose I got hired because I knew enough to get in.
Yeah.
But it was all of this work about building relationship with clients, which I did find on the projects. It's more sort of in that broader scale, or whether it was presenting to a large group, or all of those things were quite challenging for me.
Mm.
And that looking confident was a challenge. So I put on my high heels and got my red jacket on and all of these things to look like I kind of look like I was confident, but who knows?
Yes.
So and
That's
that
laughter of resonating, right? Like I completely get it.
and that whole faking till you make it advice. Of course, I was bad and I was trying to do my best, but I totally burnt out. So now my advice to people is stop faking till you make it, because it's ridiculous. So anyway, so that was one of the reasons. And then a little bit down the track, after I finished up with management consulting, I went into ANZ, and that was where I happened to come across a cultural change program that I got involved in, and I switched careers 180 degrees. I was an economics and strategy background, moved into culture and organizational culture and leadership. And that led me to learning to facilitate and be in front of groups all the time. And again, it was quite a challenge, because while I can do it now, and it's taken me 20 years, at the beginning, it was really quite a struggle, because I had colleagues who were very extroverted in behavior. And not necessarily an extrovert, but extrovert in behavior. And I just looked at them going, I can't be like that. I'm not like them. And I felt, compared myself, and I felt like I wasn't any good. And so that was quite a struggle. And until a few years down the track, I had an opportunity to co-facilitate, or often co-facilitated with a very gregarious co-facilitator. And there was one time, though, where I was co-facilitating, and it was content that I knew really well and I should be really confident about it. He kicked off. He had the room in fits of laughter, and they were just having a really good time. And I was sitting there going, oh my God, I'm going to be so boring compared to him, and I'm going to be really disengage the group. What am I going to do? And anyway, I got up and did my thing, but I was a bit flat compared to what I normally am. And somebody in the group that I knew very well knew my normal approach, and she approached me during the break and said, what's going on, Megumi? You're not your usual self. And because it's not that I can't be funny, it's just I'm just different to this other person who's very loud. And so anyway, so she came up and she said, what's going on? And I said, I've been comparing myself to my colleague, and I felt like I wasn't going to be interesting enough and all of these things. And she just looked me in the eye and said, Megumi, don't be silly. The fact that the two of you are so different is what is valuable. So if you don't bring your best, then you're letting the group down. And so I thought, okay. So that was the moment where I thought, wow, I intellectually knew that. Like in my head, I knew that I needed to bring my best and my authentic best. But that was probably the moment where I thought, okay, I really have been caught in this story that I'm not as good as others because I'm quiet or because I have a different style.
Mm.
So that was like a trigger point to go, okay, I really need to explore this. So, and I've been doing personal development for a very long time, but I really focused my energy on that, started to do my research, started to talk to people and really kind of put it all together in a way that made sense to me.
Mm.
So that was really the personal side. And professionally, what I found is as a leadership consultant, I would see leaders who are highly talented, incredibly influential, being overlooked.
Yeah.
And just because, as an example, I had a colleague who was that kind of person, very quiet, very influential, because she would work with people, collaborate with people, connect with people in her own way. But in an assessment centre, a leadership assessment centre, where they check you out in a day, look how you interact with groups and how you present after 5 minutes of preparation, she did not do so well.
Mm.
And you think, that is ridiculous. You can't judge somebody in a day where she has been influencing people for months and years and
Mm.
made mountains move. And
Yes.
so I just looked at that, went, well, that's so wrong. We're wasting so much talent. And some of the leaders that I really like to work with were some of those quietly powerful leaders. And I thought, well, there's some examples. So why wouldn't we have more of those?
Yes.
So that's kind of the two, personal and professional.
So I've got a couple of questions there. One of them that stands out especially is the metrics that we've got that are defining leadership. You know, when you were saying that there was an assessment on how she showed up as a leader. You know, I'm not the designer of these things, but it reminds me when you said that about how, and I'll parallel it actually to what we see in the current conversation about gender balance in leadership. Okay. So, you know, here we are at a point in time where, you know, through the days, through history, we've evolved from, you know, women having a certain role, and now, you know, 20, 30, 40, 50 years down the track, we're simply now taking a different position because someone took a stand for something, and now we're getting to a point where, so it's an evolution in some respects, and so therefore the numbers will grow and grow and grow, but if we look at it over that time, there are certain things in the way that the structure of organisations called, you know, the hours and the days and the face time and the way in which the organisations were structured were designed by men. Whether it worked for women was not a question at the time because we were at home taking care of the children. So for me, this conversation that you say about leadership occurs a little bit the same, and I'm not, and I'd like you to educate me on this because, you know, I dare say that in the beginning, at some point in time, when I've done a lot of leadership surveys, you know, the 360s, there's the leadership styles index, and surely there was a point where they were created based on certain things. And my question now is, are we still measuring people on attributes that we think that are designed from those limited biases? And if that's indeed the case, what are we doing about that?
So I think measurement is one, but also it's our biases regardless of the measurement as well, I would say. So measurement-wise, you know, again, it probably depends on leadership assessment centres and all sorts of things, but you can imagine leadership assessment centres, typically what they would do is they'll get people to problem solve in a group and they observe them problem solving. So often the ones that are louder would get noticed. If you're the thinker and you don't say a lot, you probably don't get noticed. So it's the volume and the quantity that often gets noticed, and whether that's physically measured or not is another question, but you can see that happening in a observational capacity, and where it might be about presentation, so it's more about speaking rather than listening. How much of listening gets measured, I have a big question mark around that.
Oh, yes.
How many people have said, I wish my leaders would listen more?
Yes.
Would be kind of a big big question for me, and so why we don't measure that, I don't know. And then also, and this is where it crosses over with gender as well as cultural diversity and all sorts of different diversity elements, where a leadership style which is considered more feminine, for example, whether it's being empathetic or compassionate or all those things that, for instance, Jacinda Ardern would demonstrate, is still not necessarily seen as strong leadership.
Mm.
And Jacinda Ardern is really challenging that and saying, you know, I see that empathy and compassion as being strong, and I completely agree with that. Or even vulnerability, just sharing some of your weaknesses or being a little vulnerable at times, not all the time, but at times can be a great strength, yet we still see that as a weakness. So I think there's some underlying beliefs that we're still caught in, and the measurements are sometimes shows up in that way, but it's not always just the measurement. Sometimes, I'm sure you've heard of people come back and not get a job and be told that you didn't interview well.
Yes.
You've had those, and you just think, but somebody's capability is not measured by an interview necessarily. Okay, there's a bit of it, but it's not the whole thing.
Well, yeah, but at the same time, I mean, when somebody's put in the spotlight of an interview, right? I mean, it can throw off all kinds of things.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And actually, there was a post on LinkedIn recently about somebody frustrated about, I think it was a recruiter who was frustrated somebody who's very talented did get a job because of that reason. And I said, I wrote a little comment, so maybe it's the interviewers or the panel that needs the skilling up. Firstly, to help them to be more comfortable and bring their best. Yes, so that ability to create comfort and that ability to bring their best is a skill in itself. And the other thing is their ability to assess beyond the surface of the style and actually get to the substance is also a skill, and maybe they're the ones that need the skilling up.
Yeah, I love your style, Megumi.
I got a lot of likes about that one.
I bet you did. That's fantastic, absolutely fantastic. And the other thing that's now present for me, Megumi, is the impact that it has on not being okay with acknowledging there's different styles of like a more quietly approach. Because let's be honest, right? We don't hear a lot really from those who are suffering in senior leadership positions. And I know, because I do have quite a few clients who are some of them, but I've also spoken to a number of people who work in the area of human resources, and they talk very frankly, not publicly, about the amount of time they spend just giving a leader the space to really release some of the pressure that's put on them. And most of it, if I look, I'm like, there's many reasons for it, right? But if we're talking about it in the context of this conversation, there is no doubt that when one feels like they have to perform a certain way or be a certain way, and there's no freedom for them to be able to express themselves, that has enormous impact on stress, well-being, mental health, and then shortly that perpetuates through the organisation.
No, I think you're right. And, there are times, of course, you have to perform, and that's absolutely fine, especially if you yourself feel like you're performing for a really useful reason and purpose. So in my book and in my programs, I talk about two things. One is appreciating yourself fully and adapting purposefully to be able to get to the place of being quietly powerful and actually being authentic. And so adapting purposefully, so you have to perform, say, for example, you're on stage and you're speaking to a big audience. If you're a senior leader, you probably have to do that from time to time, and there's a really good reason why you have to do that. And you need to connect with people, and in whatever shape or form. And so that there's a level of performance, but there's a purpose behind it. Whereas if you feel like you're sitting in a meeting and you have to be speaking all the time to look like a leader, then that's not purposeful, because that's not necessarily a useful thing to do anyway, to be speaking all the time in a meeting. You need to be listening more.
This listening thing keeps coming up, Megumi.
Oh, yeah.
So let's just go there on the book for a moment and highlight, so I can just get some, because if somebody here is looking for what are some of the things that I can do if I know that I'm a quiet person, and what are some of the things to be aware of, and/or some of the things that I can do that would give me an opportunity to have a voice.
Sure. So what I talk about in the book is to first understand why you're quiet as opposed to being quietly powerful. There's a difference. So you can be quietly disempowered. You're quiet because you feel like you're on the outer, you're in the minority. You feel quite threatened about speaking up, or it might be that you feel like there's a power dynamic in the room where you feel like you can't say anything, or it could be because it could be your introversion, but it also could be in terms of personality. I've noticed that there have been people who come to my programs who are not introvert but highly anxious. So
Right.
not in a disorder, well, sometimes in a actual psychological way, but also just personality-wise more. It's called emotionality or neuroticism in the big personality trait, 5 big personality traits, and so they're more prone to feeling anxious about things. Not necessarily in a disorder way, but just they feel more stress and they feel more excitement. So they're more impacted by the situations around them. So they often tend to find that they feel too worried about what people might think to be able to say things. So there's a number of reasons why you could be quietly disempowered. It could be just that you're completely oblivious to the impact you might have, like I have been in the past, where I would be quiet and I'd be listening, but people think I'm disengaged. So, I was completely unaware. So I was misunderstood as a result, and that's quite disempowering also.
Right.
So you have to shift from that, understand that, and then shift that deliberately and consciously to a way where you can be more quietly powerful. And I suppose if I were to share what you can do, the 3 attributes that I found of the quietly powerful leaders are really what you want to cultivate. So the first thing that I found is that they're very comfortable in their own skin. So they're quite happy to talk about their strengths, and they're happy to talk about their mistakes and their weaknesses, to the extent that one of the people that I interviewed, one of the leaders I interviewed, I know him quite well, and I work with him as well as a leader. And the very first thing he said in the interview, and it was already recording like this, and he said, "Oh, Megumi, I'm quite uncomfortable about this interview because I don't normally talk about myself." And I thought that was great. It was a great demonstration of showing vulnerability publicly about his discomfort. So he was comfortable with his discomfort, if that makes sense.
Yes. Yeah. Yes, a lot of sense.
Yeah, and so to me that's really authentic, and it just shows that he's comfortable with whatever shows up for him, and so that really is a great attribute to develop. The second thing is, because you're comfortable, you can be more present. Because you're not worried about what other people might think, or you get to a place where you can just be with people and not have those distractions, internal distractions, and also external distractions. And that, when you're talking to somebody and when they're present, you really feel that, don't you?
Oh, absolutely.
As opposed to somebody who's kind of there but not really there.
Yes.
And that's a really powerful leadership strength, in my view, where people absolutely connect, and when they're there, they're there.
Yeah. Yeah.
So that's how they build relationships as well. So they often build very long-lasting, deep relationships as a result, because they genuinely connect and they genuinely listen, and that's another attribute and also a skill that you can develop. And the third part of the quietly powerful leaders that I found is that they're very purposeful, in the sense that often a number of the leaders said to me that they never thought of themselves as a leader, and some of them were quite reluctant even. So they'll get tapped on the shoulder because they obviously had some talent, and then they get invited to step into a leadership role, and they were quite reluctant to begin with. And the only reason why they stepped into those leadership roles is because they sensed a purposeful reason to do so. So there was something bigger than themselves that they felt they could contribute to, which is beyond their discomfort, if that makes sense. And so to me, they're the types of leaders we need. Not people who step into leadership because they want the power, the control, the ability to tell people what to do. It's people who see a purpose, and they see that they're like an instrument to the purpose that they're stepping into.
You remind me of Tracy Spicer. I did an interview with Tracy quite some years ago, and it was just when she published her book, at one of her books, and her memoirs. And as I read the book, it was one of the standouts, you know, because as having read her story, I was blown away by some of the things that she navigated personally, not just in her career in media, but prior as she was growing up. And the one thing that stood out for me, and has always since stood out for me, in fact, is one thing I certainly call out as a foundation of great leadership, is having a passion for something bigger than yourself.
Yeah.
And if you do have that passion for something bigger than self, it is the thing that seems to differentiate those who are able to ride the tougher stuff, right? Because anyone can, I think it's Jim Collins in his book, Good to Great, right? Anyone can be a leader when the oceans are pretty smooth. But great leadership is, you know, how does one really deal with these difficult and navigating times in order to ensure that their attention's on being of service and being able to listen and take care of people through that. And that's not easy.
Yeah, I think that's right. So being able to navigate those difficult times, and also your ability to overcome some of your discomfort, I think, is to do with the purpose. So I often have this battle in my head, actually, about...
yes, let's go. Let's talk about some of those battles.
So regularly, I have this voice in my head going, oh my God, am I really going to post this? I'm a bit worried about what people might think. And, you know, I don't want to be coming across as, you know, a know-it-all and all these things.
Yeah.
On the other side, I go, yeah, but hang on, you've experienced it, you learned something from it, you might as well share it. It's going to help some people. And so I have this constant battle, and I just go, okay, remember your purpose, and then go, hit send or whatever he published.
Yes. You know what's really bizarre about this, Megumi, is I'm just in the middle. Last night I started writing my blog for this week that I send out as part of my newsletter to talk about and announce the win that I had as the LinkedIn right? Yeah. And I've been sitting on it for 4 days.
Yeah.
My dear friend, one of my dear friends and associates for 20 years, right? And, you know, he gets my newsletter in, and you know, I do ask for feedback from him because I'm committed to ensure that it actually connects with people. Yeah. And he said, "No, put more of you in." And I'm like, "What do you mean put more of me?" And he says, "No, you're really great. Like when I talk to you, it's just like you're so electric, and just talk more about." I was like, "Okay." So this time, right, I was like, "Oh, let's just talk about those automatic negative thoughts. Let's actually tell the truth about what happened when I got the 2020, which was seriously was, oh my God, I think they've made a mistake. Oh my God, this shouldn't be me. Like, who am I to be this person?" And so I thought I'll start putting that in the newsletter this, right? And I thought, what actually does go on? So it's made me stop and think about what are the recurring patterns of my dialogue, right? And I'm like, oh my goodness. And I thought, am I going to send this? So I've sat there for a few days so far, and I'm still going, do you really want to say this? Do you really want to tell them that you're not sure that what you're doing is making any difference and that you doubt yourself every single time you tell yourself, you know? But it's so true. But the reason I say this back to you is because it also had me then look at, well, what are the strategies that I'm deploying to do that? And I remember listening to a podcast many years ago, Byron Katie. She talked about ants, right? So I did the research about those acronym ANTS for automatic negative thoughts. And, you know, because of course, at one part when I had them, I just thought, this is just insane. And they went, oh, no, actually, that's just the brain's way. That's not me. That's just my brain. Oh, okay. So I don't have to do anything with that. I've just got to get masterful in noticing when they're there so I can turn them off. So I've learned this kind of, let's embrace those ants as they start climbing in and just let them sit, and then just walk over there and say something else.
I actually work with those sort of inner voices or negative thoughts or whatever in my programs, where I get people to recognize it first of all, but also I have this analogy of, if they're on the driver's seat in the car, you're in big trouble. So see if you can put them in the passenger seat. They may not disappear, and actually some of them may be useful. So it's not necessarily all negative. So listen to the bits that's useful, but then put it on the passenger seat, and then have some ways to interact with that voice so that it doesn't go back on the driver's seat. So that's some of the actually work that I do, which many people find useful.
Oh, it's fantastic. I mean, ultimately, finding the comfort in those, I think I'm another big fan of Susan David's work, being able
Mm.
to embrace emotional agility because there is
Yeah,
a purpose to it, like all those things do come from our stories and the things that have
yeah,
happened
that's
in our
right.
life. And if we try to shut them off, we are
Mm.
shutting off ourselves. And that's a really, that I think that's a suppressing part too,
Yeah,
right?
yeah, yeah. And actually, when you suppress them, they come out anyway.
Oh my God, yeah.
They don't disappear. They come out in sneaky ways from another angle.
Oh my God. Yes. Gosh. So many of them. This has been absolutely fabulous. I honestly could keep talking and talking, but I'm really delighted that we got the chance for you to tell us some of the things that have come out from your research and what people can do. One thing I would like to end on is, as I often do, is actually asking people to complete a sentence for me. So, and what we will do too, Megumi, is we'll put the links in the show notes to details about your book and your work, because it really is extraordinary. And I do recommend anybody who does have that sense that they feel like they're kind of on the quieter and not getting tapped on the shoulder. And I do think we should get everybody tapped on the shoulder. So the statement is, a leader is someone who.
I'm gonna find what I wrote down because I did think about that one. If that's all right.
Yeah, absolutely.
Let me just find that little line. Okay, so a leader is someone who makes a positive difference in the world while being present enough to be guided by their purpose and values and keep the ego in check, is what I
Okay.
wrote.
Can you give it to me again?
Okay,
Mm.
hang on. A leader is someone who makes a positive difference in the world while being present enough to be guided by their purpose and values and keep the ego in check.
Oh, that's fantastic. Love that. Thank you. And thanks again for joining me today. It's been an absolute pleasure to have you and talk to you
It's
about
been
this.
great fun. Thank you so much.
Thank you.